As the Red Sox 2023 season continues to creep closer, we predict their record for this upcoming season and also look at some of the reactions from Matt Barnes and Chaim Bloom on the recent trade with the Marlins.
You are Locked On Red Sox, your daily Boston Red Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I want to welcome you back into Locked On Red Sox podcast. Thank you so much for making Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day. I'm your host, Jake Azuski, and here, as always, with my co-host, in essence, Lauren Willand. And it's today that we're recording is Truck Day. It's finally here. It's crazy to believe that the Red Sox season is as close as it is. We're a week or so away from pitchers and catchers, spring training starting, and it's also very interesting to sort of see truck days happening on a day where it's -1, and I bet most players that are going to be going down to Florida in the next few days can't wait to get down to the warm weather.
If I were them, I'd be there right now. I mean, like it is so cold today. And listen, that's winter in New England, right? Like we're used to the cold, but it's always funny when truck day happens and people are like, baseball's right around the corner, and you're sitting here thinking like, how? Because it is so cold. Today's really windy. I don't know. You're in New Hampshire. I don't know if it's just as windy there as it is here, but it's cold. It's windy. It's like the perfect, I guess if you want to say perfect, winter day for New England, minus the snow, which is fine.
So my mom lives in Massachusetts, and she lives near the beach, and she said that the wind was so bad that it felt like that the house was gonna like go up and just fly away.
That's like Wizard of Oz style.
No, yeah, exactly. But it is really crazy how close baseball is. Next week, I'm going to be in Arizona helping Valley Sports with the Super Bowl. And I just thought about this now. Like, after the 12th, which is the Super Bowl, the 13th is right when pitchers and catchers starts. And so it's pretty much like football's over, baseball season right there.
Yeah, it's barely any time between football and baseball. And you think too, like now the Celtics and the Bruins, they're in their second half of their season now. The playoffs are creeping very, very close. And by the time the Stanley Cup is awarded, by the time the NBA Finals are done, it's going to be June, and we're going to know if the Red Sox have a chance at the postseason, or if this is going to be like last year when we're just holding on to any ounce of hope and optimism.
And that's probably the number one thing outside of all the other question marks going into this upcoming season that I'm really curious about is, will it be a similar April and May sort of slow start for the Red Sox, where it seemed like the offense sort of forgot how to hit? The bullpen, which was the biggest question at least last season, was unreal, and same with the rotation as well. But I'm curious to sort of see how they start, how the vibe is, what unit, offense, bullpen, rotation is lacking, and really how everything at least starts off starting in April and May.
Yeah, I mean that's what a lot of people are going to watch for, right? I mean, there's so many question marks surrounding the offense, the starting rotation, who's going to be the opening day starter, how is Chris Sale going to bounce back, what will we get from James Paxton, will Garrett Whitlock be a suitable starter, will Tanner Houck be a starter, what will Brian Bale bring? There's so many questions in the starting rotation and the offense. You have Rafael Devers signed to that big extension. Is he going to just continue to be the offensive powerhouse that he has been? Is he going to go even further and hit 40, 45 bombs, or is he going to drop off this year? Because you just never know. And you have a lot of new guys here. How are they going to perform in their first year in Boston? And the first month or two, I mean, like last year, it was a very, very slow start for the Red Sox. And yes, it was kind of foreshadowing what was about to happen for the rest of the season. But will it be different this year? Will they kind of have a chip on their shoulder because they know what's being said about them? They know the narratives out there. Will that provide any sort of motivation? It's going to be an interesting season just because it's going to be very different this year in terms of that roster, in terms of new faces, in terms of the question marks. But I think fans will have a short leash with them. 10 games into the season, if they're 2-8, there's going to be a lot of angry fans out there, and rightfully so. It's been a busy, not in a good way, I guess, off season, and fans, they want good baseball. They want to see good product on the field.
And you brought up those angry fans, and there's also obviously those positive or optimistic fans. And I saw a video from Lou Maloney before we got on and pressed record, and he mentioned that the Red Sox are the only team in Boston where if you root for them to be a winning team, or if you think that they're going to win, you sort of get upset fans back at you, going against your opinion and questioning your opinion and everything like that. And it's very understandable. That there's not only a lot of question marks in terms of offense, but also pitching, and there's also a lot of things that could be sorted out during spring training. But I think that's the number one thing: is spring training is where you start really implementing sort of that mindset of overcoming those obstacles, overcoming those odds that are essentially against you. And especially during 2021, I remember Alex Cora speaking about really starting that day one and really having that belief that this team is going to be much better than anybody believes that they are. And I think one thing that I spoke about in last episode is that vibe, is sort of that chemistry is going to be sort of the catalyst or the biggest factor of how this team is going to be able to not so much uh overachieve expectations, but some of that talent level and is a little bit in question. I feel like sometimes that chemistry can sometimes be so good that it helps you get wins when maybe you shouldn't be. And I spoke about the fear the stash sort of potential theme. And we saw Kiki Hernandez rocking it on Twitter a few days ago, Tristan Cassis recently throughout this offseason, same with Josh Winkowski. And I'm curious your thoughts, and also if this maybe becomes a thing over the next week or so or throughout this season.
Yeah, it's kind of like what we said, when Casas debuted the mustache, and I was like, listen, he can keep it until he sucks, and if he goes on some slump, then off with it. And I'll say the same thing about the others who do have it. And maybe that's kind of what this team needs, like high morale going into the season. They all know the narrative around them, and certainly Alex Cora knows. I mean, he was right there at Winter Weekend. The players were at Winter Weekend. They know that they know the narrative. And that's not going to go away until they can either prove it or until they prove the fans wrong or right. But a lot of fans are pessimistic going into the season, and that's okay. And a lot of fans are trying to see the excitement going into the season, and that's okay too. But maybe the Red Sox, they need a little more going into the season, because they know there's not a lot to be expected from them. Just reading everything that everyone on Twitter seems to be very angry, but there is reason that we've given people reason to be excited for this team, and there are individual reasons to be excited for this team. And maybe something funny, like in 2013 they had Fear the Beard, and then in 2004 it was the Idiots. So it's like something a little fun, and those teams are very, very different. 04 and 13 and now, like, those are very, very different teams. But if you have something a little fun, like I said, a little morale going into the season, then so be it. Like, let's have a little fun here, start the season on a high note, and let's just see where it goes.
And even in 21, like, they had the home run cart, they had the little wave thing at second base. And I'm curious to see, especially with Kevin Plawecki, not with the organization anymore, how are they going to sort of replace sort of that unique celebration, or sort of how you're able to build up that chemistry within the dugout throughout the game, and really be able to show that swagger that they really weren't able to show last season. But starting to look at some of the record predictions or odds that have been coming out over the last few days with the season continuing to creep up, it's interesting because Fangraphs has the team being very bad, and then Vegas Insider and Fox Sports, in terms of the odds, think that they're going to be relatively good. And so it's interesting to see that really on both sides of the end, nobody really knows what to expect from this Red Sox team. And I wouldn't be surprised if when they were sort of coming up with these numbers, maybe doing some simulators, they still had questions in their mind of how things are really going to all play out. And so for Fangraphs, they predict that the Red Sox are going to have a 78-84 record and be dead last in the AL East. Not to say that that couldn't be a possibility, especially with how stacked this AL East is. But in my opinion, just seeing the 78, I get it. But at the same time, I don't really think that that's realistic. If they get tons of injuries like they did last season, if with how injury prone this team is, if it does start to happen where we see guys getting injured left and right, that could definitely be a reality. But then we got Vegas Insider 84.5 total wins, and then Fox Sports 85.5 wins.
Yeah, it's all over the place, because I think that there is, and we've talked about this, that the potential is there for this team to be good. It's just a matter of how good they will be, how they will mesh together, what their chemistry is like, and how they stack up against the other teams in the AL East. And now with the new schedule, I mean, they're going to be playing a lot less of the AL East, but it's still, predictions are funny, right? Because I mean, last year we were all in on this team being a postseason contender, because on paper they had a very, very good team on paper, and they still have a decent team on paper. But everyone is, they're old. These guys are older now. They're unproven players for the past few years. There's so much unknown surrounding them. So I think that's what's making it difficult to really make these kinds of predictions for the 2023 season. And I saw some of the responses on Twitter that saying, I think one person said 92 wins. I was like, oh, I love that
Andrew
optimism.
Ray.
Like, let's go, baby. I love that. Like, I love that optimism, but because it still shows that there are fans out there. And even if he was being sarcastic, I still love it. I'm taking it as an optimistic thing, taking the optimistic route there. But I just think, like, we don't know what Chris Sale, he barely pitched last year. He's barely pitched for the Red Sox in the last 3 years, but he could be a very, very strong candidate. He could be the ace of this staff. James Paxton could rebound. But again, we have no idea how he's going to come back from the injuries that he's faced, especially just last year. So I think that's where the bookmakers and the odds guys and all, the bettors, where they get kind of wrapped up, because there's not a lot of optimism around this team going into the season, but there could be. And, I think they're hovering around like 82, 83 wins next season or this season, but they could surprise everyone and turn around and do a 90+ win season, because the talent is there. It's just which direction is this team going to go? Because there is really no direction of this team.
Right. And I think if, we were given 3 words to describe this team going into the season, it would be there is potential. I
Yeah,
think I don't know
100%.
if we've gone an episode without saying that specific word, but I agree with you. And it was also interesting for me to look back at 2022 going into last season, what those predictions were, because most of the big outlets, ESPN, Fox Sports, Fangraphs, they predicted that the Red Sox were going to have 85 to 87 wins. And funny enough, I was looking at an article with all those different predictions of not only the records, but also the awards. And it said Chris Sale, Cy Young, and he was like number 2. And I was like, boy, did that not work out.
See, that's the thing. Like, you can't predict these things, because I mean, Chris Sale had the freak injuries
Right.
leading up to the season. I mean, the fractured rib, and then of course the broken pinky. Like, that's just a freak thing. Like, that pinky cannot be avoided. And breaking a rib, and there's nothing you can do for that. And same with the pinky, you just need to let it rest and heal. Like, so that's the thing though. Like, these teams that are predicted to have big win totals, they could be 1 or 2 injuries away, major injuries from disaster. And there was a lot more than injuries last year to the Red Sox, and they did deal with a ton of injuries, 100%. But yeah, I mean, Chris Sale could have been a Cy Young candidate last year. It's just unbelievably bad luck is just following this guy around. And who knows? I mean, I don't see it happening, but he could be a Cy Young candidate this year. Baseball is weird like that. You just never know what can happen. And I mean, people think Chris Sale will pitch three starts and then be done for the year. People think Chris Sale will rebound and get 18, 19 wins. That would be fantastic if he could do the latter and not the former. But it's just, it's game by game. It's one game at a time. And hopefully it's much better than last year. I think that they could be, but it's going to be a fun / interesting season, simply because people are going to be watching, because they don't know what's going to happen.
Right. And I believe I put out a tweet, it was like 3 weeks or so ago, and it was like, predict Chris Sale's ERA in innings pitched in 2023. And sort of the consensus was like 325 to 350 over, 120, 130 innings. And, if he's able to get and even anywhere close to 150, 160, I think, people will be happy. But, you alluded to it earlier in the episode. We put out on Twitter asking for your guys' predictions of what the Red Sox record will be in 2023. Starting off, we got Moss Chops. He said 81-81, just 500. I could see that happening.
That's a safe. Yeah, that's safe. That's a fair prediction with all the unknowns. And listen, 500. I feel like for this team that a lot of people are down on, that might be good enough for some fans out there. It's obviously not good enough to get you into the postseason, but it might be good enough for some fans. Like, wow, we didn't suck as much as they thought they would.
Right. And then, we brought up the 92 wins, and, if that ended up happening, you would see cocky Iggy come out just in my New England way with, you hate us because you ain't us, and just, having that delusional optimism. This team's going to the World Series. What are you talking about? And then we got Sully Baseball. He agrees with Fangraphs 78-84. And then we got Steven Shaw and also the Lowell Lock Monster. They both agree 86-76. But Steven Shaw said a possible wild card berth. That would be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, listen, baseball in the postseason, anything can happen. I mean, we saw in 2021 with the Red Sox going as far as they did. No one thought that. No one thought they were getting out of the wild card round. And when there's one game, whatever, it all comes down. Essentially, it all comes down to one game, right? So anything can happen in the postseason, and anything can happen toward the end of the season if two teams are in the fight. I mean, look back in previous seasons when the Red Sox were in it, and then it came down to one game that they weren't even playing in. Yep. So maybe they'll need some help from other teams around the league to get in, but yeah, it is possible. Like, never say never here.
Now, I will say, even though those final days of the regular season are stressful, it is sometimes fun, watching the scores and being optimistic. How a team could, if the team loses and another team loses, it's kind of like the Week 18 NFL scenario. It's like this team has to win, this team has to lose for another team to be able to get in. But hopefully it doesn't come out to that. Hopefully it's convincing wild card berth. And if that is the possibility, I'd love to see a rematch of the Yankees and Red Sox wild card, maybe a Red Sox Rays, potentially like that. But we're going to continue to speak more about some of the things that have happened over the last week or so regarding the Red Sox and them trading Matt Barnes to the Marlins. Chaim Bloom and Matt Barnes gave sort of their reactions to this move over the last few days. But before we get into that, I just want to take a second to talk to you about FanDuel. So this year, the only app you need at your Super Bowl party is FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. And we're super excited about our new sports betting partner because they are the #1 sports book in America. And if you're new to FanDuel, that is even better. They have so many great features that make sports betting fun and easy. Download FanDuel now so you can bet Super Bowl 57 with no sweat first bet. You'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from money line to point spreads to who will score a touchdown. And obviously, with the Super Bowl happening in just a few days, got the Chiefs and Eagles. Very curious to see how that game essentially pans out. Who will be the Super Bowl MVP? Will it be a wide receiver like we saw last year with Cooper Kupp? You can bet on all of that over on FanDuel Sportsbook. The app is safe, secure, and super easy to use. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your no sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NFL. And now starting to speak a little bit about a subject that we learned about right on this podcast. Seems like, I think it was a week or so ago, Matt Barnes being DFA'd and then eventually being traded to the Marlins for Richard Bleer. And it's interesting to sort of hear the reactions, especially from Matt Barnes himself on the Name Redacted podcast with Jared Carrabis. He said, I was blindsided. And it's interesting to sort of hear how he also heard the news. He spoke more about that on Carrabis' podcast. He essentially said that Bloom called him. He was about to start playing video games, and before he went into the game, he figured it was just a check-in. And Bloom sort of told him the news that he was being DFA'd. I laughed when he said his response. He was like, "Why?" And, yeah, he wanted Bloom to sort of give him an explanation, probably thinking in his mind, even though he probably doesn't have any ill will against, guys like Ryan Brazier or Caleb Orr, but he probably thought in his mind, I figured, I was relatively higher on the list to not get DFA'd than, maybe Bloom in the front office thought. But then he also mentioned that Bloom essentially said without saying it that, his numbers in the last month or so of the season were luckier than, the numbers actually show in terms of his ERA or FIP or anything like that. And so it was definitely sort of interesting to hear, especially from a guy which is added to a long list of long-term Red Sox players that Bloom in this front office have essentially just cut ties with in really different, unique ways.
Yeah, I mean, we reacted rawly to the Matt Barnes DFA, and it's whatever. It's a business decision if that's what you want to call it at the end of the day. And Chaim Bloom said something similar about Ryan Brazier and his numbers, and it was kind of the opposite of what he said about Brazier. Like the numbers, they don't. You have to look beyond the ERA because Brazier's ERA obviously was not that appealing toward the end of the season. And yes, he did have a 2.25 ERA in September and almost 10 ERA in August. So yes, there was clearly some adjustment there. But if you really want to go deep, like I'd still take Matt Barnes over Ryan Brazier. We don't need to rehash that argument, but I think that Barnes was blindsided. We were blindsided. I think a lot of Red Sox fans were blindsided because it seemed like there's just other people on this roster, not who I don't want to say deserve to be DFA. That's harsh, but like who I would choose to DFA over Matt Barnes. And if they truly have a lot of hope in Ryan Brazier and Caleb Ort, I hope it works out for them because they'll see it. If it doesn't, it's the internet never forgets. So it'll be a lot of look at Barnes doing Barnes things in Miami. If Barnes goes and dominates in Miami, then like Chaim Bloom in the front office, more so than they do now, will never hear the end of it. And I think that, like I said, it's a business decision. It's whatever. It's over now. And Blyer just seems kind of like a cheaper version of Barnes. Maybe we'll get a little more out of him. I don't know. But, they're building their bullpen and they think that they claim they want to be competitive. They claim that they're building a solid team. Okie dokie. But it just still seems like the bullpen was fine. Like they did nothing more to the bullpen. They did need some lefties, so I get that. But if they went into the season how it was before Matt Barnes got DFA'd, I would have been like, whatever. It still was bolstered at the end of the day, and it still was better than 2022. So let's just see what happens. But now it's just it's still better than it was last year. But what a time. Like you're going to go play video games, relax, and, start like probably thinking about packing for spring training, and you have no idea if you're going to have a team all of a sudden in the matter of just a few minute phone call.
And, Bloom ended up joining Chris Cotillo on the Fenway Rundown, sort of broke down sort of not only his thought process through the Barnes DFA, but also sort of talking about the trade as well. And, Cotillo asked him prior to speaking about the trade, when you built up this bullpen, a few weeks ago, did you expect Taylor and Barnes to not be in sort of that equation, especially with spring training coming so close? And he sort of talked about, with the Mondesi deal, Taylor was a guy that the Royals really wanted. They felt like that was the best swap for those two players. Then they realized that they didn't realize after that moment, but they knew with that trade that, they were going to put themselves in a hole, sort of like we've spoken about with, a more right-handed heavy bullpen. And then they had to get another left-hander. And he also spoke about as well that Barnes being traded to Miami wasn't something that was set up prior to the DFA. And he was actually surprised a little bit that they were able to get such a great piece in Blyer for a guy like Matt Barnes, even though he has all the value that he does have. You're getting a guy that, if they don't trade him, they just release him. And, the Marlins could have just found a way to sign him. But obviously trade, make sure that you guarantee get the player that you want. But that was something that I found interesting is sort of, how Bloom sort of, thought out this sort of whole equation and, was not even really expecting to trade Barnes in the first place and would have, he didn't say this, but it kind of implied he would have been okay if they just released him, if if, a trade like this didn't come up.
Yeah, and when you do get released, obviously you have the opportunity to, see what else is out there. When you're traded, of course, you're traded to the team that the team chooses, basically. So I like. I hope that Matt Barnes does well in Miami, and I am surprised at the trade as well. I thought that his contract and just his track record of the last 2 years, I thought it would be very difficult for them to find a trade piece or trade partner. And we talked about how they've let Nate Eovaldi and JD Martinez and even Xander Bogaerts. How if this was the entire plan the plan the entire time, why didn't you even try to trade and get something back for them? So at least they get something back for Matt Barnes. What that something is, we don't know. It's just another question mark on this team and another question mark on this pitching staff. But I guess it's better to get something and then just release him, and then he goes and signs somewhere else, and you just get nothing for him. So beggars can't be choosers. At least they got something, but it's the same thing. We have no idea what Bleyer's going to bring to this bullpen.
And then, also the money aspect too. That's the big thing that we brought up in our raw reaction. And, before the money sort of aspect was announced, this deal essentially seemed like a fleece. And then when you look at it, that, the Red Sox barely even was able to take off $1 million in, CBT sort of penalties. That's something where, especially with them only having, 14 to 15 now to work with, you would have thought that the Barnes move was more of a money move than rather than just offloading somebody off the 40 man. But Bloom also mentioned that Bleyer's ability to get weak contact, in his previous success in the AL East as a member of the Yankees and the Orioles were a big reason why he was appealing to the front office. Makes a lot of sense, especially with how much this team, and especially the pitching staff, struggled against AL East teams throughout last season. But we're going to continue to speak a little bit about some of the ramifications of the Bleier trade and sort of the player that was DFA'd, and speaking a little bit more of our reactions of that. But before we do that, Lauren just wants to take a second to talk to you about Built Bar.
Built Bar is probably my favorite protein bar on the market right now. And if you're looking for a delicious treat, but you don't want all of the fat and calories that can come with a candy bar, then you have got to try a Built Bar. It's February now. It's very cold. We're in the dead of winter. And some of us, maybe it's difficult to keep up with our New Year's resolutions. Maybe we're crushing our New Year's resolutions. But a lot of people's resolutions do tend to revolve around eating healthier, making the gym a priority. And Built Bar helps you maintain that level of eating healthy. And like I said, you have got to try a Built Bar. They're healthy. They taste good for you. They're so delicious that you won't even think that they're a protein bar. And if you're asking how do they make it so good, part of that reason is that they are all covered in 100% real chocolate. The Built Bars, the Built Bar Puffs, everything covered in 100% real chocolate. It's so good. And the flavors, they have flavors for everyone. There's cookie dough, there's double chocolate, coconut almond, and there's peanut butter brownie. There's so many flavors. There's something for everyone. And we've talked for the last few years that you go to built.com and you pick out your order. Now you don't even have to wait for it to show up at your door. You can just go to your local Walmart, head to the pharmacy section, and pick up a 4-bar box. And if you're closer to a Sam's Club, you can go right there. They have the 13-bar box, tons of flavors, cookies and cream double chocolate. The coconut puffs are there too. So now you don't have to wait. But if you want to wait, you can go to built.com. If you are a patient person, pick out your order and wait for it to show up right at your door, especially on a day like today when it's just absolutely freezing. Or if you want to brave the cold, just head over to Walmart or a Sam's Club and pick up your box of Built Bars.
In this next portion of the episode, we speak about the DFA of Frank Herman. And I did want to make this little bit of disclosure before getting into this next segment that when we hit record, we had no clue that Frank Herman was going to be traded to the Chicago White Sox. And right after we got off, the trade was announced. So Frank Herman, as I mentioned, was traded to the Chicago White Sox for Theo Denlinger, who is a former 7th round pick back in 2021, and last season pitched in Double-A, in High A, and amassed a 4.47 ERA over 48.1 innings with a 12.3 K per 9, a 3.9 walk per 9 with 5 walks, and struggled a little bit during his time after being called up to Double-A. Over 32 games in the Double-A level, amassed a 4.70 ERA. So wanted to mention that. So when you're watching this, you're like, why are they saying that they had no clue where Frank Herman was going to go when that was already announced? Well, now you know. that we didn't know when we recorded this, and now you also know who was acquired for Frank Herman. Now let's get into this next segment. So we spoke a little bit about this in our last episode, or excuse me, 2 episodes ago, when I sort of broke down the Richard Blyer and Matt Barnes trade and sort of the ramifications of reliever Frank Herman being DFA'd, and wanted to talk a little bit more about that and sort of how I'm curious to see how this all plays out. Obviously, we saw a trade ended up happening with Barnes, but I'd be very surprised if they just release Herman, especially with how efficient he was, mainly obviously in Worcester last season as the closer, and how much potential he really does have as a quality bullpen arm for a future team in the majors. Obviously, didn't perform that well when he did get that small opportunity of 4 innings last season, but I was very surprised that we spoke about these two guys a lot, Caleb Ort and Ryan Brazier, but with Herman only being 25, Brazier being 30, Ort being 30 as well, especially with the lack of depth that the Red Sox do have in terms of the pitching department and quality pitching in their farm system, I was surprised that, Herman essentially got DFA'd out of anybody.
Yeah, that's kind of the question, right? Is out of all the candidates you could have DFA'd, why did you decide on Franklin Herman? So, I mean, I was looking forward to seeing what he could bring. Obviously, not looking forward to that anymore. And by the time we release this episode, we'll be no, it'll still be a few days away from actually for the Red Sox needing to make a decision. But maybe we'll have some clarity. Maybe they'll find a trade partner. You would think for somebody his age, Herman's age, that somebody might just want to take a flyer on him, or maybe they release him and a team signs him to a minor league deal or something. Because it just seemed some of these DFAs, I almost seem like they were a rushed decision, and it reminds me of the trade deadline where you trade Christian Vasquez. There's like, okay, this is the direction of this team, and then they just kind of make these panic moves. Like, what is going on? So, not necessarily like that. These moves are panic moves. It just like, is it the right move? I guess. And like you said, he had a very, very brief stint with the Red Sox, so nothing we can sit here and be like, the sample sizes, and maybe that's part of it. Maybe it was just too small a sample size for them to commit to him. So, I mean, we'll see. Like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if a team does try to take a flyer on him, but I think he'll end up getting released and he'll get some minor league deal somewhere. And I hope he crushes it. I like the guy. I was hopeful for the guy. So it was just another surprising move. Another move where I'm like, why? Like, why him? Because there's Ryan Brazier, Caleb Ort, the two names that have just been somehow skating through these DFAs for all off season. And they're just kind of picking up the others, like the other pitchers that there's like, hey, you can go. DFA for you. You get a DFA kind of thing.
Going all Oprah on them. But yeah, I agree. And I think especially with Herman, a guy, especially later part of this season, even though the front office doesn't listen to anything that the fans say, a lot of fans were very excited about Frank Herman and what he could bring, especially with his success in Worcester. And I saw him pitch a lot throughout his time with the Woo Sox, and he was very impressive. Did a great job of being able to get quick outs, very effective stuff, strikeout stuff as well. And that's the one thing, especially with some of these moves, it's tough to not be a little bit nervous that maybe you keep a guy like Ryan Brazier or Caleb Ort or another guy that I didn't even think about, Wyatt Mills, somebody who you got off of waivers, who has barely really done anything in the major league level, especially last season with the Royals, not really too great. And you start to think that maybe those guys don't pan out whatsoever, and then Frank Herman goes to another team and balls out. That's the one thing that makes me a little bit anxious about some of these different moves, especially with a younger guy like Herman.
Yeah, and that's a risk that you take when you get rid of or you DFA a younger guy who has potential. There we go again. But that's just the risk you take. And if they thought it was worth the risk, then all the power to them. But this is something too that could come back and bite them and be like, see, you could have had him. Why can't the Red Sox get players like him? It just kind of has that kind of storyline written all over it.
Now, we're going to continue to keep you posted about everything that is not only going on with the Frank Herman situation, whether he gets released, whether he gets traded, also everything else regarding the Boston Red Sox. But the biggest thing that I'm really curious about, especially, with Truck Day happening, season continuing to creep up, spring training right around the corner, who is going to be that Cutter Crawford player that is going to be able to get over the hump and make his way on the opening day roster? But We're going to speak about all that sort of stuff within the coming weeks, getting you ready and excited for this 2023 season. And if you have not yet, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Red Sox over on YouTube or on whatever audio platform that you listen to. Right now, we're posting 3 days a week. In a few weeks, we're going to be going back to 5 days a week to really be able to help you be as knowledgeable and as excited about this upcoming season as we are. But we greatly appreciate, as always, for you making Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day. Now make your second listen Locked On MLB Prospects. Host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Do you know what's also free? Following Locked On Red Sox on Twitter. It's LO_Red Sox. And one portion of this episode that you heard was us going through some of the responses that we got on Twitter. If you want to be a part of that and you want to be involved in some of these different episodes or some of these discussions that we're having, make sure to follow us over there. Majority of the time when we do an episode, we'll sort of post a question. Probably has to do with what we're talking about, and we want to try and get you involved with each and every single episode and make this podcast the most fan engaging Red Sox podcast that there is out there. You can also follow myself. It's at Jake Iggy over on Twitter, and also Lauren. It's three laws, Lauren with 4 R's. But we greatly appreciate everybody tuning into this episode. Hope you have a great rest of your day. We'll end this episode how we always end it. Keep the faith, and let's go Sox. Peace.